My guest today is Matthias Sturm, a German-born and now Paris-based composer and songwriter whose work, I think for me, moves somewhere between art rock and experimental music and something maybe a little bit harder to categorize. So for me, Matthias, your albums don't feel like collections of tracks so much as they feel like worlds, atmospheric spaces where sound and mood and
Mhm.
narrative all
Yeah,
unfold over time.
yeah,
And I think there's a real
yeah,
literary
yeah.
quality to your work and a sense that
Mhm. Thank you.
each each piece is part of a larger arc, even though you don't necessarily explicitly define the arc. The
Mhm,
arc is there, and I think it's
mhm,
for me, for listeners
mhm.
to find it and follow it. So
Yeah.
when I listen to your music, I get the feeling a lot of the time that it's not just a composition and not following a composition, but I'm really you're asking me to inhabit something, which I find really lovely and interesting. The atmosphere, there's a
Mhm.
tension, there's a real strong emotional and conceptual depth that I think doesn't really resolve quickly. And we can talk about this, but I think it's not meant to resolve. It's there probably to provoke. And I think that gets at sort of the Byron-esque description that you have of yourself. Anyway, that's sort of where it lands for me.
Peace on earth, I'm going to the underworld. I'm going if the sun goes down, passing through the gate. Hold my hand, I can't stand it anymore. I'm going to the underworld, passing the last gate. Cold as ice, white bleach bones, but free in mind. I'm going to the underworld, reaching the last gate. Take my hand, soon we'll be away from here. The sniper and the waterman passing through the gate. Peace on earth, you see the world is upside down. The boat has whistled birds that sing, coming near the end. Peace on earth, I'm going if the sun goes down. I'm going to the underworld, reaching the last gate. Take my hand, you see the world is upside down. The boat has whistled birds that sing, coming near the end. Peace on earth, Jesus Christ, hallelujah. Peace on
And I think the provocation also, in a way, works to slow us down, right? So you want us
Yeah,
to listen, I think, differently and maybe reconsider what it is that the music is doing for us in the first place, and maybe what your intention is with the music.
yeah,
So we're talking today about all
yeah,
of that,
yeah, yeah.
music as a
Yeah, yeah,
narrative
yeah, you
and how these worlds get built and what happens when we step inside them. So, Matthias, with that introduction, let
mm,
me say welcome to the Sum of All Wisdom. And um,
thank you.
yeah, tell me a little bit about your origins, German, East German born, and
Yeah,
grew up there. So
yeah,
let's start there.
y yeah, okay. Um, I was born 1969 in East Germany, that's true. So I've passed my childhood and my youth, till the break of the Berlin Wall, as you know this event very well. It was a very important event.
Mm,
And but this maybe let's say it was a bit schizophrenic because it had two aspects. I mean, the first aspect was politics and a political aspect. Otherwise, I grew up in Dresden, which is a town which is known in Europe or in the world as the capital of Baroque historical buildings, you know,
mm,
with
mm,
beautiful, huge ensembles of Baroque styles, buildings and stuff. And we had already, you know, it was a contrast to this dictatorship and the politics because if you want, I grew up very in a very romantic environment, and the problem was school. You know, you could not say something. I entered into the Academy of Fine Arts of Dresden in a very young age with 15, course there was a split to say because you know just passed my school leaving examination, my bachelor, and parallel I've had to begin to study on the Academy of Fine Arts in Dresden. So I studied 3 years there, and with that moment I entered in a new, if you want, a new circle of people. You
mm,
know, alternative people. Today, this is known as East Boheme,
mm,
and in addition, I started out from a very young age of 10 years to have private lessons of a Dresden artist who was in these alternative scenes and circles, and so I've got acquainted even as a child with all these personalities which were officially politically incorrect, if you want, and observed by the national security.
mm,
And I've got, after the break of the wall, I had the right to get insight into into these documents and papers about me, and I've learned that they observed me from 15 years on, 15, 16 years on, exactly at the point as I entered into when I entered into the Academy of Fine Arts. To, you know, to see how this will work out with my friends
mm,
and stuff. So let's say I passed school in the last edge and phase of Stalinism in East Germany, because they had a phase from till mid of 70s. They started out to be a bit more, you know, moderate with art, with artists, with musicians, with people who would be a bit more at the side and so on. And then something happened that they expatriated a very famous singer-songwriter from Berlin. Wolf Biermann was his name. Maybe you Google it, the story.
mm,
And Chris, they then the party, the Communist Party, they were so enthralled about it to say, hey, we've got them loose, we've got them to lose, you know, we got them to lose. Let's, you know, let's fix things. And after that, it was in 1976. So he was expatriated to West Germany. He could not go back to Berlin East.
and they started out to redefine this dictatorship in a very hard way. And so I was, if you want, I was infected with that
Mm,
during my last school days, and at the end they punished me with a very perfect thing that you had to go to a military service which was you was cursed into this. You know, you could not say no, or you could not say, I mean, I would not be involved in this stuff. There was no way. So you and at this and in this moment at this moment you've lost your civil rights, right? They
mm,
took my passport, they took everything from me, my documents, and I was never more than a number in this whole thing. And they stuck me into a very retreated place, you know, a very retreated place in the woods, you know, where I had to work on the railways. You know, we renovated railway
mm,
distances from in the country. It was hard work, 14 hours a day. I mean, today you would say it's slavery work. It was unofficial
mhm,
slavery work. So,
mm,
but as you had lost your civil rights, nobody could, you know, defend you or do something of this. And but otherwise, I must say it was my luck because we were out to the civil hemisphere. So they did not imprisoned us. We had to work, so we were in contact with civil persons, and we got, you know, we got what you normally need in such situation to be. We got schnapps, and you know what I mean, and we got to meet women in the city, and you know, I mean, it was my luck because it was better than a prison situation. So.
mm,
And well, as I came out of all this maze, yeah, the wall was they broke the wall. So, but to say, I mean, that is something people did not realize. Really, it wasn't a revolution. I mean, it was not really a revolution. The thing was that Gorbachev and your big chief at this time, I thought it was Reagan. Yes, Reagan
yes,
at this time.
right.
Reagan. Yeah, yeah, it was Ronald Reagan, and Gorbachev and the Chancellor of West Germany. They simply pointed out to East Germany to say, "You guy, we will, you know, turn off the money
Mm,
over." So, and this is what happened, you know, because Gorbachev calculated in we have to end these armaments. You know, we have to end Cold War because it ruined the US, the USA, the same way as it ruined the USSR.
mm,
And that was the motivation was to say, hey, we end this and we open the markets. Because if you want, this was the starting point to globalization
mhm,
historically.
mhm,
So that was the situation. And I came out of all this, if you want, at the right time, because I was 20 years old, 21 years, 20 years old. Yes, I was at the right time, at the right place. And I started out then as one of these talented young painters from East Germany to enter West German and international art markets. And soon I've got representation by galleries in West Germany, and I started out a career as a visual artist.
mm,
And so for us, it was a big hour. But let's say, all in all, I did not had at this time already, as today, any reflection of what it was or what it will be to have a career as an artist in the Western Hemisphere, you
mm,
know, under capitalistic conditions, you know. I mean, you have a new god. The new god is not politics or ideology; it's
right,
the money. So,
right.
So I was not amongst them. They cried out loud, "Oh yes, hello, we have." So, I mean, for me, I stood this critic of capitalism as I'm today. You know, I'm the same, and I made my experience for sure. But and I told this to my wife a few days ago, to say, you know what, what was really the most historical event in our lives. Before, I would say it was the break of the war, sure. But today, I would say it is the launch of AI, which
Mm,
has more historical impact on us all as any other event of the last 100 years.
mm.
We have to take attention of this, you know.
Tell me, Matthias,
But
what
it's
is it?
yeah.
How is AI impacting your work now? Do you
Well, let's if
integrate?
you want to if you want to start with that, I'm and this is the next point. I think not we should not heat up this discussion anymore.
Mm,
This discussion is so heated up now,
you're right.
and there's so much talked about, and there's so much importance in even only while we're talking about,
Mhm,
you know. And it's the development, it's technology. We choose, if you want, in between our evolution as a human civilization, we choose the way of tech instead of other ways. You know,
mm,
we could have trained us in spirits. We have to train us in more, you know what I mean, more spiritual ways, but we choose tech and technology as a way to save us. So we destroyed everything with technology, and now we are hoping to develop technology to save us from a catastrophe, which
r
is really, you know,
insane.
absurd. Yeah, we are really, really absurd. And this whole discussion is absurd because now I'm thinking more and writing more about let's let's end this discussion about because I mean you know, let's take out all this edge and importance of a thing such AI, because AI is AI. It could be helpful. It could be helpful in the studio. It could be helpful in medicine. It could be helpful what, with whatever aspect of or genre of work. And but it's not really a new divinity or a new God.
Mm,
And I was reading something very shocking for me. There's a I don't know if you know this guy. His name is Chiola, and he has a Substack blog which is called The
Ted.
Honest Broker.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you're Ted. You
that's
know
right.
Ted.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
and
something.
Ted, as he's a very bright and lucid guy. He's writing a lot about that. And what was shocking is that he once he wrote an article about that 500 people in the States, in your country, are meanwhile mentally ill from 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 this thing, you know, from
Mhm,
because they think they could save their lives with that. They could ask God what to do.
right.
And you know what I mean? So and this is also heated up in times where, and that's the problem in general with art and music now, and that's the bigger problem of it all. And Ted was describing this as a society of dopamine hit.
Mm,
You know what it means? People are never more pay attention to anything at a length of more than 3 or 5 seconds. So how to create art and music for people that are never more able to pay attention to it?
mm,
Because our brain is changing, you know?
Being rewired,
The
right?
pathways, yeah, the wiring is changing, the pathways are changing. This is a strange thing. I mean, this has impact on our on our schoolboys, schoolgirls, on college, you know, and Ted had all these things the summaries of that professors in your country, but it's the same in Europe, you know, there's
Mhm.
no different. They are mocking about people who they could not pay attention anymore anything, you know, on the universities and college. I mean, how this will end, you know, because learning is a very deep. It involves deep our brain waves in a completely other way than all these virtual stuff and virtual reality, you
That's
know.
right. Yeah. I think one of the things about your music that I think works against that, Matthias, is I feel a real genetic sensibility to your music. And by that, I mean, there's a lot of bloodlines woven in. And
Yeah.
for me, the DNA, if I can use that metaphor, the DNA, some of the critical work about that's been written about your music really focuses on the rock sounds that you bring in. So the
Mhm.
Bowies and the Roger Waters and the 70s and
Mhm.
80s uh,
Yeah.
um, sounds that you integrate. For me, I feel a real strong Sun Ra influence. And I don't know if
Mhm.
that sort of transition from hard
Yeah.
bop jazz to free form,
Mhm. Yeah.
jazz,
Mhm.
impacted you, but it just feels so uh Gesamtkunstwerk, right?
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
It's bringing
Mhm.
everything
Mhm.
together to give
Mhm.
us
Mhm. Mhm.
a stronger sense of not just a storyline, but a world that you're building that
Yeah.
is something we should be in
Yeah.
for the long term, at least for the long
Yeah.
term of the record, but it
Yeah.
lasts beyond a record for me. So I
Yeah.
just if you wouldn't mind, tell me, I'm we have all kinds of by we, I mean Americans. We have all kinds of
Yeah.
assumptions about East Germany and the communist bloc and that sort of
Yeah.
era. But tell me what it was like as a young man to hear music. How did you hear music? How did music come to you? How did you find it and listen to it and begin to play?
That's to say, I mean, we were actually not really blocked from anything, you know, because we
Mm,
had let's see, for example, we had discotheques at a normal way. Okay, this was a bit of a, you know, this it had a name. It was a youth club, you know, that
mm,
was the name of it, and you had to go in. You had to be your relations with the door holder and doorman, and it was all like it is even I don't know if you enter a discotheque in New York, and we had a troop of maybe 12 guys, you know, and girls, and we are all from these more alternative circles. And I remember that we had the program was from all what the 80s had to offer, you know, from Depeche Mode to Tainted Love, from, you know, the biggest hit
mm,
in our discotheque was the same as in West Germany. It was Tainted Love of Soft Cell and all this kind of stuff of the 80s, you know. No, that was not our, even the Beastie Boys, you know, because they played Beastie Boys and all this kind of stuff. And I've got my records from, I've had an uncle in West Germany who was sending me regularly a list. I had a wish list, you know, of records
mm,
coming out, and then he was sending this to me, and then maybe friends came and said, "Oh, you have you know, for instance, Prince, Sign of Times, you know, was a big thing in Dresden too." Um, of course, we've heard a lot of jazz and funk, and really Prince was a big star in East Germany too. And so they copied my, you know, gave them the record, they copied it, and we had all this kind of with cassettes and stuff.
mm,
And it is also to mention that we had a big alternative label scene. We had cassette, you know, MC label culture.
mm,
So labels would records mostly punk bands, you know, because I started out with a punk band in
mm,
in Dresden. And we just got these cassettes, music cassettes to make covers and stuff. Today, all these kind of things are very cult and famous. You can find this even in museum collections today
Mm.
in Germany, as a kind of the youth culture of East Germany. There were two influences, very big influences. The first was punk, and the second was hip hop. If this came in, I jumped in, because everybody jumped in,
Mhm.
And for me, it was interesting as a visual artist or a young guy who started out to paint and to design. Graffiti was a very interesting thing for me. A very basic language, to communicate so it was. I mean, it was really behind. We were behind an iron curtain, but it dissolved because and we had really big parties in Dresden with excellent jazz bands,
Mm.
local jazz bands,
Mm.
and we had garden parties, and we were all in black. It was not too so different from West Germany, but we were overwhelmed with this kind of depression, for sure, a
Mm.
collective depression and angst, because you had a system of denunciation and of denouncing people by the police, and you had to take care who's your friend, who's not your friend, who you can talk not to this guy, and it was a bit. This was a bit schizophrenia in
Mhm.
case, and I remarked this later as I got acquainted with my future wife, and she told me your behavior in a very strange way. I have to say that I love you, but you behave really sometimes in a very strange way, and it lost his importance with the time. But as we and it was in '92, Jennifer and me, we've met in 92, April '92, with 21 years, and she taught me that. Yeah, for sure. And at this time, this was very interesting because it was very rare to have a couple of a West German woman and East German man.
Mm.
At this time, these things were completely separated again, and it united later, much later. So
The memory of growing up there and the schizophrenic sort of
yeah.
ethos, right, that inculcated, how does that come into your music, Matthias? How do you
Well,
integrate that?
that's simple to that's simple. You could hear it on my second album, which is called Luna Park. And this is exactly an album about my youth in East Germany. So
Mm.
there were a lot of, at this time I worked on new music, and then you have a moment in life where memories sweeping
Mm.
in from flashing in from another time. So it's a question of your age, it's a question of your state or mental stuff. And so it got more about an album about this Cold War kid I
Mm.
was, and you can hear it. And I prepared a cover which had some more photos of this time, and some more famous photos of events of this time. And so, um, uh, but I tried to get it into this term of a lunar park, all these flashing lights and carousels, and more as a place where young people are musing, and going out, and to have such kind of, yeah, spin of time.
Mm.
What is youth? How is this? How it is passing? How it is going away. It's nothing more than a marketplace, where you are going strolling out, and I try to get this into this concept album, which was more planned as a musical. So I worked out
Mm.
stage plots. I worked out stage sets. I worked out really um, something like to have projection, video projection, and stuff. But at the end, as it is, it was too special, so I did not find any investor in the entertainment to put it on stage,
Mm.
which is a big investment. You have to, and and it stood a project. Let's say it is it's 1 hour music, or little bit more of 1 hour music, and then I just decided to select all the songs, because there were also instrumental parts and stuff, more in a classical way, more way of jazz instrumental music, and I collected this on this album to say, hey, this is what I can hand you as a future rock opera or something, as a future musical.
I listened to that album a couple of times, a few times actually,
Yeah,
for this conversation.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
Puppet Robe's Anthem.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's I don't want to fawn Matthias,
Mhm.
but I think that's a genius piece of music. And I was so, I don't know what the word is, confused, shocked when Also Sprach Zarathustra came in there. It was like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
am I hearing two
Yeah.
different, is something else playing on in the background?
Mhm,
And so I
mhm,
really focused on that, and I paid attention to
mhm,
what you were doing with the
mhm,
music and layering it
mhm.
with Strauss.
This is how I set up music, I just try to combine things which you would normally not think you could combine.
Mm,
But this is fusion, this is thinking about the prospects of a music, more to think about how to transcend something in combining things that are maybe not to combine. But I must say, this idea is maybe not really new, because I'm the second artist who used this. Because there is a piece of I think it's Shikuria, but it's an instrumental. This
mhm,
one here is more surprising, because you have this kind of average protest song, this more Dylan style, or if you want something like this, and then this symphonic stuff comes in, and it gives everything I think a new atmosphere. It gets you to the edge of what I say. I
mhm.
mean, and so as a dramatic counterpoint of everything, yeah.
I saw the sugar mountain when I was in Candy Town. I've met a man who sold the world while I was on the run. One for the money, another for the shows. All we do is twitching in the puppet robes. I've seen the devil who has eaten flies. The flies you, soon you'll be hypnotized. Now that you're paralyzed, this preacher shows his face and torts. All you do is dancing in the puppet courts. I've seen the war martyr, how they shoot the gooks in Vietnam. I've seen the president just calling out a better time. It's a common practice just to be abused, yeah, folks, till you get your shaking in the puppet robes. I've seen the kingdoms, how they come and go. I've heard the trumpet horn of Shira shown. But it's a laughing show, the emperor's new clothes. All we do is twitch and in the puppet robes. I've seen the guiding star of Bethlehem, traveling with Alice in the Wonderland. Life's what you make it, watching TV soaps. All we do is twitch and in the puppet robes. Oh, dancing in the puppet robes, twitching in the puppet robes, dancing in the puppet robes.
And also works as a sort of counter parody, right? So the song itself is a parody of sorts.
It is
And
a
then-
parody. It is a parody for sure. Yeah. But it's a parody. But if you want, it's real because that's the real puppetry and puppet show or puppet Muppet show that we have in capitalism and in this time. You know, I mean,
That's
it's
right.
nothing else. So it's more about the truth to point it out, to say it loud, to to say that's it. So, yeah.
We don't hear that enough.
Now people are so. I mean, there's today, you know, everybody takes it personal, and this is interesting because we have this discussion also here in Europe from philosophers, the more postmodern philosophers, who accuse this public political discussion to be shut down. Practically, you know, there's no age in it. What's very interesting, and I don't know if people check this out. If you go back and you see what's very interesting, YouTube, for instance, if you go back and you see some TV shows, for instance, Germany, you know, from the 70s, and I see how they discussed on the edge politics officially, you won't find this anymore today. Everybody shuts, you know, it's all about this thing, you know, to be correct. This fuck up, sorry, political correctness that we now do as kind of a middle class, you know, culture thing to trip us honey about our heads and you know what I mean. So over our heads and that's awful. I think that's the most dangerous point. There's no danger anymore in political discussions. And this tells me that we are globally into dictatorship, which I say, I describe it as a comfortable fascism. You know what I mean? A fascism which is comfortable. In this way to say this is not about torture chambers, this is not about terror. It's, you know, it crawls slowly into our hearts and heads. You know, that's more dangerous than classical fascism ever was.
It's the bourgeois revolution, right? To infiltrate the mind and the heart, exactly that sort of way. And capitalism is hand in glove with that sort of thing. So
with the difference that now there's a different class which settles now on power and influence than before. It's another class, you know. It's not a kind of personalities. It's not a kind of you know what I mean. That's all a bit more for me. Really, this is a very dystopic fact, and I pointed out years before, and everybody told me, Matthias, you're crazy because you're an artist. You don't let us go with your Kafkaesque reading and thinkings. Today, all these guys came up to me and said, Matthias, you were right. It's exactly as you said. I said, yeah.
You've seen it up close, right, beforehand.
I mean, it's as artists are more sensitive, and in my particular place, I would say I'm more sensitive because I grew up in a dictatorship, so I know what it is, and I see the signs, and I can judge a bit what comes out of all this maze. Yeah.
I think there's a kind of reflexivity in that too, right? It's the exposure
Yeah.
sort of prepares you to be aware, more aware
Yeah.
than some of the
Yeah.
rest of us
Yeah.
about these kinds of things as they come.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, you were, I think, if I remember correctly, you were born in Eisenach. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Eh,
That's right.
Also where Bach was born, right?
Yes, I know his birthplace. By the way, it's a lovely little house, and with fantastic instruments and a collection of medieval instruments, and a very nice place. And Eisenach is famous also for the fact that Laffer uh, uh, did translate the Bible from
Mm.
Latin to German. That made this Protestant revolution in Germany, and this is all a bit connected with Eisenach. So it's a very historical place. Yes, yeah,
Speaking of revolutions, right? Those are both very significant events that happened, the birth and the sort
yeah,
of education of Bach, but also Luther's translation.
yeah,
And so Homesick in your first album, Blood and Thunder, Homesick, I think starts with Bach's Bourrée. And
yeah,
that's so I wonder if you could talk about homesickness in the sense of
yeah.
what do you feel as the artist composing that song and including Bourrée as the
Mm.
starting point? What are you feeling?
That's funny because I mean, if you imagine you're born in a country which doesn't exist anymore,
Mm,
would you think that you could settle on a term like home anymore? I mean, for me that's it was never there was never any other place than where I sit at the moment. It's got as I was younger, it told people uh, home is where I'm sit for the moment, where I have a chair to sit. It's on one way, you might say it is yes, because I know people, for instance, here in France, I see people getting very old because they're sitting on at their place for most of their life.
mm,
You can develop a strain with that, because you're sitting on your place, and you have a home for maybe 50, 60 years. And I observe that people are getting very old here on this fact. Um, I never felt since the break of the war, I never felt anything home more than the place who I'm at the moment, because and for me it was clear it it was for me it opened a chance to see the world, or to walk this planet, or to be a globetrotter. And my wife and me, we wished very young already to move to France. So I'm very lucky and happy that this happened to us. And we grew up our children here, which is quite different, because you can imagine that it made some problems, because German school life is completely different from French school life.
mm,
And but we managed to raise them here, and now both are out of the house already, because we are already grandmom and granddad, with two little grandchildren.
mm,
And both made a career. The younger one is studying recently at the Sorbonne University at Paris in philosophy and politics. And they do their way, but it was sometimes very hard because school in France is very authoric. It's like, it's Napoleon-like.
mm,
It stems from a heavy system of because the teacher in France is a more um, you know um, completely other personality than they see it in Germany now. In Germany, they see it as a social manager,
mm.
but in France, it's more about Napoleon will say, okay, this and that.
Do it my way.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you've been all around the world touring, and you produced your first
Yeah,
album in LA. You've been in,
yeah,
I think, global tours, Dubai,
yeah,
India, all over the place.
yeah.
Tell me, how do how does your experience with performing and bringing music to an audience, how does that then come back to you in terms of what you do next?
Well, it started out already as I was younger. 'Cause it was much before, because I had this even this career, this constant career as a visual artist, and music was a heartfelt place. It was something which really is till day a heartfelt thing. And it started out with you know this maybe, or you remember this slam poetry. We had a big tendency of slam
Mhm,
poetry back in the days. I was in Hamburg in Germany, Hamburg and
mhm,
Berlin. So I started out with a musical program like would say a rock cabaret in German language, and like a musical theater thing, you know. And I performed this on stages in Berlin, Hamburg, and then as we moved to France, it stopped a bit, and it you know this all this kind of more international career. It started out in 2007 with a thing which you remember, I'm sure, was My Place.
mm,
So My Place Music. So it was at this time the top place for musicians. And I remember at this time it was even so familiar that I remember I've had chats with very famous musicians at this time, with Matthew Bellamy from the Muse from England, and big bands, and we just talked. You know, it was like a place where musicians
mm,
were talking with each other, and then I've got a call, or I've got a message from a producer from Seattle, Dave Phillis, who was working on a lot of albums and in the era of grunge. So he was the first, you know, the first place there in Seattle. These things came out with Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and he worked on the first record 10 of Pearl Jam,
mhm,
and then started out to produce bands in this way. I'm from Blind Melon, and so, and he reached out to me to say, "Hey, I've heard your demos on MySpace. Very interesting. Let's talk." And so we started out talking. I was already in a promotion campaign with a guy from a promoter from Los Angeles. So things came to each other. I've got opening slots on an EMI
mhm,
artist from Holland and Belgium, and did opening slots on big venues in Belgium and in Holland, you know, on bigger venues. On the Ancienne Belgique for AB is very famous, you know, famous venue at Brussels.
mm,
And so these things came together, and yeah, he got me under his belt, so to say. And we started out recording this first album at this private studio of Blind Melon in North Hollywood. And so things started out to be a bit more international, if you want. And simultaneously, I've got management deals to tour India two
mm,
times, and I've got management deals to tour Dubai. And in 2013, I had a solo tour in the US, which was quite heavy and devastating because it was a 3 weeks tour as a solo artist in summer.
yeah,
So and I remember as I came in to New York, and had two concerts in New York at Rockwood Music Hall and the Rock Shop at Brooklyn. We had it was about 58 degrees. It was more than 160 Fahrenheit or something. It was amazing. It
wow,
was like you would you would die. It's very interesting too. I've got to learn about social differences in New York, because if you went out from Lower Manhattan to take the train to Brooklyn, there's no, you know what I mean? There's no
mm,
air condition in it. So I thought, okay, if you live in Brooklyn, You know, it could be summer, my guy. You know, this is more about what New York is. You know, because it's very interesting, very interesting, and yeah, it was an interesting tour. Yes, and the morning after, I was back, a bit jet lagged and all this kind of stuff, but I had a feeling. I know about the distances and your country, and I know a bit about what an amazing large distance this country provides between cities. And if I think back, I had a concert um, at Portland. Portland, very interesting, very freaky, really very strange place. And I've, as I did not knew anything about Portland before, I had to talk to people for sure. I booked, I've had or my booker had booked me a motel, which was, I don't know, a work travel back from the city, you know, and I had to go with a train to pass. Amazing. I mean, but really interesting. Really interesting. Portland's very strange. You have these tarot shacks, you know, these little shacks where you can read someone who's reading the cards for you and those kind of stuff. Very crazy. Yeah, interesting.
What year was this?
This was in 2013. I did this Blood and Thunder tour. It was to promote my first album. It was connected with this nomination for the Independent Music Awards, and I've got a booker. But I stopped then in 2014. I've got again the chance to have a management deal with management from Florida, but that would be on tour 200 days a year, because otherwise you don't get the money in, you know. That's the fact, you know. You have to tour at last 200 days, and I then refused this deal because of my family. But you have to see, I don't know any professional musician here in Europe which is not divorced or which is not separated from his family, because it does not work out, you know. It doesn't work out. No wife will accept this for more than 5 or 6 years, that you're on the road. I mean, really, this is difficult to you cannot have both, I think.
right.
And so I decided to quit this active touring phase and to be a touring artist, and I was back to be a recording artist. By the way, because I'm today very interested in music production. So,
Let me ask you. So we have 2 or 3 songs of yours that we're going to put into the episode. One is "Peace on Earth" for sure.
yeah,
I think the one of the others is "All Beauty Must Die." I'd love to
yeah.
hear from you, the guy who put these together, what those songs mean. What's the takeaway for listeners to when as they're listening to this? What should they walk away with?
But I call it dark songwriting. It belongs a bit, or it refers a bit to, um, for instance, English literature from the 19th century. You know, these dark tales about the evil and the good, death and life and love and hate and all these kind of contrasting things. And these are poems. Yeah, it's more, one could say it's like spoken word, but it's not really spoken word. It's singing, you know, and it's dark storytelling with a passion for more essential or existential stories.
It seems to me you are mostly in the space between those, the black and the white, to the love and the hate, to the good and the evil.
Yeah,
And you're
yeah,
exploring where do they come together? How do they come
yeah,
together? What does that look like?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
when I listen to especially "All Beauty Must Die," a little bit back to sort of influences and your how I situate you as a listener within what I know about music. I hear a lot of Nick Cave and I hear a lot of Tom Waits,
Yeah.
especially in the lyrics and the
Yeah.
way you're
Yeah.
talking about those. How do we get away from binaries that just create worlds that are unreal and do
mm,
something
mm,
that's more inhabitable and interesting.
mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. But this is this type of music. It's like Nick Cave too, who
Mm,
reads a bit more dark or a bit more melancholic. Maybe Bates is the contrary. He's more on this other side, you know. But these both are, I'm pretty sure, very melancholic personalities,
mm,
as I am. And uh, but if you mention Cave, I mean, I'm a bit sad because, I mean, he really managed to stay on stage. You know, he really managed
mhm,
to, whatever crisis he had, he managed to stay on top and to these amazing concert circuits. But I had this moment to left this all, and I'm not so. I'm not so sad about it because firstly, it saved my family life, and my daughters were in an age that I had to support my wife here with them both, and so I was back to the studio. But surely it's not the same thing. Yeah,
mm,
it's not the same thing. And I observed we have a big change in behavior of the audiences today. Because as I started out to be on stage, you have this experience too. I'm pretty sure you never had this crowd before your eyes that you started with the first tone and the mobiles going on and
mhm,
they film or they switch or they do something. You know, there's no attention span.
mhm,
So it means if you're more in a music which is more introverted, you have no chance. As for today, you have to maybe open the concert with I don't know, with a plane, with an airplane doing a start or something that everybody's vacant, you know, because I mean, or you do it like Jim Morrison at his time, awake, to to cry out, hey, hey. uh,
You have to get
uh,
their attention for sure, but
yeah, yeah,
keeping
yeah.
it long enough for
Uh,
them to get into the actual gist of
so
the song.
to I only want to say to grab the attention of an audience today
Mm,
is much more difficult than maybe 10 years before.
mhm,
And I don't know where it ends for artists who are more in this intimate circle of things. Maybe there's a difference between club concerts, club tours, and bigger stages for sure. You know,
mhm,
and the problem too is, and I played big stages and festivals. You don't have control about something because you cannot judge reactions because you too distanced from the
mhm,
crowd.
mhm,
Even if you have them before you cannot judge what's going on there on the higher ranks and stuff. So you're completely concentrated on your performance. So it's for me, my favorite thing is if I have a public of 30, 40 people and I can see what they do. Are they focused? Yeah.
mhm,
Do
mhm.
I have them or do I have them not? So it's the harder way. One would say that's harder to bound 30, 40 persons than to have a big concerts who's everybody waiting you. Maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
You are
But
working on an album for, this year, next year? What's your next release?
yeah, my recent album, which I produced a new album this winter.
Mhm,
Um, the name of the album is Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg is a German word. I don't know if maybe you know this word for it's more about an invasion which happens very quick. This is Blitzkrieg. I think it hails from World War One. I think so.
mm,
And it's a bunch of songs which I was very fast this time. I was wondering about myself because normally it takes years to prepare an album this way because I'm really working on songs. And it's not
mm.
like to put it out like they put out albums today and too much. I don't understand it. But the problem is now, and this is very interesting, what to do with this album because this is the first album I want give it to streaming platforms because it's over. I talked to all my colleagues and to musical mates, and everybody says the same. No, we stop this. We
Mm,
don't get they don't get hands on our albums anymore. These
mhm,
streaming platforms. But what can you do? I mean, if you are a touring band, it's very easy. You do this album on vinyl, or you do limited editions, and you
mhm,
try to sell it one to one. But in my case now, I'm really thinking over what can I do. For sure, there are a lot of new approaches on. I'm my network on LinkedIn. I'm connected with a lot of tech guys in Britain, in Great Britain, and elsewhere. They all try to build a stable model to save us from these streaming platforms and
mm,
to create something new for artists, independents, to get their music heard and paid by people one to one without any of these strangling streaming aspects. And but this is really a problem. I don't know how to do. I can give it maybe on my website. I can promote it on my website. Okay, I can promote it here and there. But if you want to stay out of these streaming services, I don't know.
it
Very,
definitely is
very,
a stranglehold, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah. No, I just because I had another interview with a journalist not long time ago, and he asked me for any solution, and I've said, okay, let's strike. Let's go on a global strike. But the argument was then, okay, what should they care? They have they have enough stuff on it yeah, was it okay? But if there's no new music, there are no new products, there's no attention to anything, because dopamine hits, it has to
mhm,
be new, it has to be,
mhm,
uh, and but really, there are alternative tech guys in Great Britain. They try to create something new, but it's difficult.
mm.
Come out of this ancient model to
Neil Young
which
tried
is
that, right? I mean, he took all of
yeah,
his
yeah, yeah,
content off of
yeah,
Spotify, put it
yeah,
all on
yeah,
his
yeah,
website. It was
yeah,
still on
yeah,
Apple
yeah,
and other
yeah,
services, but
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think he was successful
No, no, no.
as a
Even major artists are not successful in
yeah.
in this way, because the most absurd aspect on this is that these platforms are not uh, getting profit out on music. It's not about music anymore.
Mhm.
They talk about content. We all talk about now
Ugh, it's a
as art
terrible
as a
word.
content. So and I'm any more an artist. I'm a content creator. I'm a
Creator.
I'm a and I'm a content creator
Yeah.
which holds the rights of his contents. Where does it lead? It leads to what at the end,
Yeah.
And think back, and it's very interesting that we had a lucid German philosopher Walter Benjamin, who told us already in 19 I don't know 1940 something that in times of reproduction art will die. That was very lucid
Yeah. He was
to say.
prescient that way. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. This was a very interesting fact, and this was already the beginning of technology. And I wrote a little article about that because this is my point. Let's heat down this discussion, because we had
Mhm.
this discussion before. This is not new.
That's
We
right.
have a new technology, and then we discuss what will die. But maybe it won't die, long as artists are doing their work.
You have to keep doing the work. This is sort of the message. It's
Yeah,
it's it's
yeah,
difficult, right? Not just the distribution and the
yeah.
sort of awareness, but
Mm,
actual I think the motivation to keep doing it in the face of these things is a
mm,
challenge. I wanted to say, Matthias, I was laughing, about content creation, not at you. I'm laughing because this feels like of a piece with our earlier conversation about the bourgeois revolution, right? We have
yeah,
reduced everything that's creative to this content bullshit.
Yeah.
And it makes us all very comfortable. When you're an artist, it's a different aesthetic for people who are thinking about these things.
Yeah.
And if I come to
Mhm.
Spotify to hear art, I think I'm coming to it for a very different reason than the majority of people who do, engage
Mhm.
in that content, right? It's a consumption model
Mhm.
that I think is very
Mhm.
destructive.
But don't forget, you are not this average consumer. You're a sensitive, reflective person, and I had, for instance, this remembers me on something. I've had a radio interview at the beginning of on the outbreak of my tour in New York, which is called Legends Radio, and this is Evan Ginsberg, and it's mostly about music and wrestling. So he's a big fan of wrestling. So and
Mm,
he interviews wrestlers, but more about their life and all these kind of miserable and misfortunes social wise,
mhm,
what wrestlers live in America. So I mean, this is not really mostly not a happy career. This is a very hard. It's a bar fight, and it's about music. And then he came out with one question which really hits me because he asked me, Matthias, what do you think? What you can do here in America with such intelligent, reflective music, with a public which is never more able to get this? Good question.
it's a good
Good
question.
question.
I wanna know your
Yeah,
answer.
yeah. The answer was that I've thought to even I think there are intelligent people out here in America which will get it. What should I say? What do you think you can do with art here on
Mm,
these circuits? Because as we know that A&R wise, for sure you could say that radio programs in America are more standardized than in other parts of
that's
the
right.
world.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, my biggest fan base was America. You
Mhm,
know, and because they got it. But how can I? Where can I market it, or where can I do this? And but it's funny because 10 years ago it was again, that an A&R guy would say to you, industry is about numbers. Today, they will say industry is about algorithm.
So
At this time it was numbers. It was time of this social networking thing.
mhm,
That an artist had to go strong with social networking to get on his stuff on YouTube, to get 1 million clicks on his videos, to get this and that. It was about numbers because
mhm,
for sure it was in times that the major label could discover music on YouTube, but to check the numbers, not the music, to check the
that's right.
numbers. How many
That's right.
clicks? How many clicks? Okay, far away what it is and what. Okay, 10 million clicks. Okay, let's try this guy because he has 10 million clicks on his video, and that was about numbers, and I'm amusing about it today. It's about algorithm, whatever it is, because an algorithm, if you know what an algorithm is, this is completely stupid. Algorithm is a mathematical operation which we had before. I mean, internet is function like this, a computer is function like this. It's all about algorithm. The whole life is about algorithm. Even biology is algorithm. I mean, this is about these to say ideology of having a word as a thing, to make people crazy with that, and I see it that, and this is the most dangerous fact, that they torture a younger generation of musicians with you must do this or you must do that, and it
Mhm,
changes every 10 years. Everything's changing, and the
mhm.
A&R guy will tell you you have to go on this way, you have to go on this way, you have to go this, and what comes out? Conformistic music, but that's not about art.
That really does get at content creation, right? You're doing something very
Yeah.
similar to what everyone else is doing. Matthias, let me ask you about Blitzkrieg. Is it available?
not yet. I mean, the master's done. Yeah, the master's
Mm,
done, and now I really, if you want, I use this podcast a bit to actually uh, come up with this question: what to do if you want to avoid these streaming platforms which are exploiting a mass of products, contents
mhm,
to make money out of something which is not really related to music. It's not about music. It could be something else, you know. It could be. It's about a mass potential of contents which are fabricated and used in a way. Uh, I don't know. It's a scam. It's really it's a hard scam. You know,
mhm.
an official scam on people. And and the problem is the public is not getting aware of this. You know,
Right.
they think of Spotify as a very correct and financially ruled service which serves to artists and which serves to listeners. Nobody see the background
Right.
about this all.
And it's not
And
serving artists.
it's not serving artists, it's serving tech companies and tech guys who got on the wisdom how to make money out of this bypass
Mhm.
of all this. You know, because the money flows, the cash flow is completely hidden under these products.
So
Yeah.
your masters are done, for Bleach
Yeah.
Creek. Is it pressed? Is it on vinyl? Is it on CD?
No, but usually I do promo CDs, you know, I do a bunch of promo CDs sending to usually to my networks of radio DJs and stuff and uh but let's see it as a I mean, look at my age. I'm 57 years old and I'm a bit more calm about the fact that this all is coming into a more let's say biography thing, you know, it's more a
Mhm.
documentation of my state, of everything I do, you know, if I my paintings, of my artist books, of all this kind of
Mhm.
stuff. So it adds to a bibliothèque of or archive of inner belongings.
Mhm.
For sure, I give it to people, and for sure, there's a little audience for that, but there's never more any. I'm not obsessed with success anymore. You know.
Mhm. I understand, yeah. But this has been a great
Yeah.
conversation, Matthias. I really wanna thank you for your time today. I love
Thank,
chatting with
thank
you.
you. Thank you so much. It was very nice to chat with you, and yeah, it was an honor to meet you and talking this way. Yes.
I agree. Thanks very much. Keep in touch, definitely, and if you figure out what the next model is,
Yeah.
let me know. Let me know what
Yeah,
you're
sure,
experimenting
sure.
with.
I let you know. I let everyone know. They are working on it. You know, they are working on it since years. I have a guy in London
Mm,
who has a new platform. There's a beta version, but nobody. You cannot see anything because you have a website, a blank website. If you want, you cannot use it anymore because he's not ready.
mm,
And it's called Sawtooth, and he really try to get us a platform out of these streaming habits, and let's see how it works. I know a guy, for instance, in Germany who has a little site in Hamburg where you can pitch your music for sure, but it has not this global reach. You know, the problem
mm,
is that you need simultaneously to reach the state of having a global outreach, and
mhm.
let's see how this develops. I mean, I'm pretty sure it will come because it need to come in certain ways, you know. And
There's enough discontent with streaming, I think. You've encapsulated
yeah,
that today,
yeah,
but I
yeah,
think there's enough
yeah.
of that to drive
Yeah, yeah,
the some kind of innovation. We'll see if it's better,
yeah.
right? Hopefully it is, and that it doesn't
Yeah,
get
let's see
sucked up
how it
in.
works out. But I'm in general. I think this model of earning money with music will completely try out. So we have these tour secrets, sure, but you have to be really, you have to be much younger, because physically, I don't know if I go ever on tour again. I would go on tour, but in a more, more comfortable way. You know
Right.
what it is, to travel like this and to have 2 days, one concert, 2 days, 1 day travel, 1 day concert. It's really it's physically really heavy. I mean, to do this.
And takes a
And
toll on the body,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and the mind, for sure. Thank you for
Very
all
nice
those
chat, and
things.
we stay in contact on Music to Deal, maybe, if we
Absolutely.
communicate.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
So
Thank you.
thank you very much. Thank you
Be
very
well.
much.
Take care.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Reste ici sous les arbres, fais voler tous les arômes. Le phénix qui renaissante de ses cendres. Moi je suis plus d'un fantôme. Quand je passe au-dessous les arbres, tu apparais en noir et blanc. Moi je suis bien excitable, tes jolis yeux ensemble. Oh, beauty must stay. I'm far behind, hunting ghosts like a preacher man. A fool, falling in love, stained with the blood on the hands of a dagger man. I stand by the cross, stand up a prey, hunting love like a crazy man. I look at the world, watching the gloom, hunting ghosts like a voodoo man. The world is fake, it's a seek and a hide. All beauty must die, but I don't wanna lie. My pillow is made from a reptile's bone. The daylight will change, turning life into stone. Stand by the cross, stand up a prey, hunting love like a crazy man. I look at the world, watching the gloom, hunting ghosts like a voodoo man. Oh, beauty must stay. I'm far behind, hunting ghosts like a preacher man. A fool, a falling in love, stained with the blood on the hands of a dagger man. I walk down the line, wasting my time, hunting ghosts like a preacher man. I look at the world, watching the gloom, hunting ghosts like a voodoo man. I stand by the cross, stand up a prey, hunting love like a crazy man. I walk down the line, wasting my time, hunting ghosts like a preacher man.